Gentlemen, listen closely. The moment a man stops being a man is the moment he starts losing not just her, but himself. When you lean too far into insecurity, acting unmanly, begging for understanding, or drowning her in explanations, you're quietly erasing the legacy you're meant to build. The moment a man loses his masculine frame, everything around him begins to shift, quietly at first, then loudly, brutally, unmistakably. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in small choices, subtle reactions, and repeated compromises he thinks are harmless. But every time he sacrifices his identity to keep the peace, every time he hides his truth to avoid conflict, every time he shrinks himself to appear easy, he is unconsciously dismantling the very foundation that makes him strong. And the world, especially the woman he cares for, feels it instantly. A man's frame isn't about ego, dominance, or being controlling. It's about the way he carries himself, the way he thinks, the way he responds, and the way he leads. It's the calm certainty in his voice, the discipline in his actions, the clarity in his purpose. It's the unspoken message he sends. I know who I am, I know where I'm going, I don't need to be validated to stand tall. When that disappears, everything changes. A man without a strong frame doesn't become more loving, he becomes more reactive. He doesn't become more understanding, he becomes more needy. He doesn't become more patient, he becomes more insecure. And people don't pull away because they're cruel. They pull away because they no longer feel anchored, especially a woman. A woman doesn't feel safe when a man collapses into emotional volatility. She doesn't feel drawn to a man who stops being decisive. She doesn't feel inspired by a man who abandons his purpose for the sake of pleasing her. Attraction isn't built on passivity, it's built on presence. When a man loses his frame, his presence disappears. She feels the wobble, she senses the inconsistency, and the thing she won't always say out loud is the very thing she's feeling deep inside. I can't trust this version of you. The loss of masculine frame usually begins with overthinking. A man starts obsessing over her reactions, her tone, her silence. Instead of leading, he starts seeking reassurance. Instead of communicating confidently, he over-explains. Instead of expressing boundaries, he tolerates disrespectful behavior. Slowly, he becomes emotionally dependent on her mood. He tries to prove his worth instead of living it. He thinks accommodating equals affection, but in reality, it signals insecurity. The tragedy is this: men break their own frame trying to protect the relationship, believing gentleness means weakness and strength means conflict. But what they don't realize is that real strength isn't loud, it's stable. A man with frame can apologize without groveling. He can be kind without being walked over. He can communicate without begging. He can love without losing himself. That is the balance so many men abandon. And once frame is lost, the worst version of a man appears. He becomes emotional at the wrong times, quiet at the wrong times, and passive at the worst times. He becomes a shadow instead of a leader, a pleaser instead of a partner. And a woman's instincts respond accordingly. She creates distance. It's not always intentional, it's survival. When she feels he's leaning on her for emotional stability, she steps back to breathe. She steps back to find clarity. She steps back because she can feel that he's not standing on his own. But the beauty of this truth is that masculinity is never permanently lost. It's reclaimed. A man restores his frame the moment he stops needing permission to be himself. The moment he stops explaining his worth. The moment he stops chasing validation and starts chasing his purpose again. He rebuilds by returning to discipline, physical discipline, emotional discipline, spiritual discipline. He returns by cutting out the noise, the excuses, the reactive behaviors. He returns by becoming the type of man who leads with actions, not arguments. A man with strong frame doesn't try to control people, he controls himself. He doesn't try to win with intensity, he wins with consistency. He doesn't demand respect, he embodies it. When a man gets back in alignment with his values, his goals, and his mission, everything begins to snap back into place. His energy changes, his tone changes, his presence deepens, and ironically, the woman who once felt the need for space now feels safe again. Not because he chased her, but because he recentered himself. This is the truth most men overlook. Relationships don't fall apart because of lack of love. They fall apart because a man forgets who he is. When he reclaims his identity, he doesn't just save the relationship, he elevates it. He becomes the man she respects, the man she trusts, the man she chooses. Not out of fear, not out of pressure, but out of genuine desire. Masculine frame isn't about being hard, it's about being grounded. It's about staying rooted in strength even when the world shakes you. It's about leading with calm certainty, protecting your peace, and living with clarity. When a man embraces that, he becomes unshakable. And everything around him, his relationships, his purpose, his legacy, begins to rise with him. Courtship is one of the first things a man abandons when he becomes comfortable, and ironically, it's the very thing that made her fall for him in the first place. In the beginning, a man shows up with intention. He pays attention, he listens, he plans. He gives her the experience of being chosen not by accident, but by effort. But somewhere along the way, many men switch off that part of themselves. They assume the relationship is secured, the effort is no longer required, and the connection will maintain itself. What they don't understand is that the moment they stop courting her, the relationship doesn't stay the same, it begins to decline. Courtship is not a phase, it is a mindset. It's a standard a man sets for himself, not a performance for her. When a man stops courting, he's not just neglecting her, he's neglecting his own masculine identity. He's losing the creativity, the leadership, and the intentionality that define him. It's not about buying expensive gifts or grand gestures, it's about presence. It's about showing that she matters. It's about reminding her through action that she is a priority, not a responsibility. When a man stops courting, he stops leading. He becomes passive. He expects the relationship to run on autopilot. But relationships don't decay overnight. They decay in silence. They decay when "are you okay?" It becomes a routine instead of sincere. They decay when conversations become predictable and shallow. They decay when both partners live in the same space but stop sharing energy, and she feels it before he does. A woman's intuition picks up on effort long before she verbalizes discomfort. The biggest mistake men make is assuming she will stay inspired by who he was instead of who he is now. Early on, he was intentional because he wanted to win her. Later, he becomes comfortable because he thinks he has her. But a hive, Al, you man never leaves the courting mindset. He keeps surprising her. He keeps elevating himself. He keeps growing in ways that keep her attraction alive. Not because he fears losing her, but because he honors the relationship. When courtship stops, the emotional polarity changes. She starts feeling more like a roommate than a partner. She stops feeling pursued, desired, or appreciated. She starts carrying more emotional weight than she should. She starts wondering if he still cares, still notices, still chooses her, and that doubt, once it enters her mind, starts creating distance. She won't always say it directly, but her behavior will show it. She becomes quieter, less engaged, less affectionate, not because she doesn't care, but because she no longer feels pursued. Men often respond to this distance with confusion. They think she's being dramatic. They think she's just emotional. They think she's changing, but she didn't change. His effort did. She's reacting to the absence of the man he used to be, and instead of correcting himself, he sometimes makes the situation worse by blaming her or demanding appreciation for minimal effort. That only pushes her further away because now she feels unseen and unheard. To restore courtship, a man has to go back to the basics, back to intentionality. He has to show effort without being asked. He has to communicate with curiosity, not routine. He has to make plans, take initiative, and show leadership. A woman shouldn't have to beg for romance, for attention, for connection. It should come naturally from a man who values the relationship. Genuine courtship isn't something you turn on and off. It's an ongoing expression of respect. The greatest truth is this: a man courts the woman he values. If he stops courting, he's either losing interest in her or losing himself. Sometimes it's not about her at all. Sometimes he's drifting away from his purpose, his discipline, his identity. And when a man disconnects from his mission, he disconnects from everything else, including her. The relationship becomes another place where he shows up halfway. That emptiness reflects back to her as neglect. But just like frame, courtship can be rebuilt. A man revives it by reviving himself. When he becomes consistent with his habits, his confidence rises. When he invests in his growth, his leadership sharpens. When he reconnects with his purpose, he becomes more intentional with her. Courtship isn't something you perform, it's something you become. It becomes part of the way you speak, the way you move, the way you plan, the way you love. It becomes a reflection of your character, not your circumstances. A woman in love doesn't expect perfection. She expects effort. She wants to feel chosen even after she's yours. She wants to feel seen even when life gets busy. She wants to feel appreciated not just with words, but with actions that reflect consistency. When a man maintains the courting mindset, the relationship never stagnates. It grows, it deepens. It becomes a space she wants to stay in, not escape from. Stopping the courtship is one of the quickest ways to lose the relationship. Continuing it, even years in, is one of the strongest ways to keep attraction alive. Because when a man keeps courting, he isn't just keeping her. He's keeping the best version of himself alive. Poor communication is one of the quietest ways a relationship breaks down, and most men don't even notice it happening until the distance has already formed. It doesn't start with yelling. It doesn't start with arguments. It starts with subtle misunderstandings, unspoken assumptions, emotional reactions instead of grounded responses. It starts with a man forgetting that presence matters more than paragraphs. It starts with him talking to be heard rather than communicating to connect. The truth is simple. Communication is not about how much you speak, but about the energy you bring when you speak. A man who is secure communicates with clarity. He says what he means. He listens with patience. He expresses himself without losing himself. But when a man becomes insecure, reactive, or overly emotional, communication turns into chaos. He begins to overtalk, over-explain, overanalyze. He tries to justify his intentions instead of standing behind them, and the more he tries to force closeness, the more she feels pressured, misunderstood, or suffocated. A woman is deeply attuned to emotional tone. She feels inconsistency before she can logically explain it. When a man communicates from anxiety, she feels it. When he communicates from insecurity, she hears it. When he communicates through blame or defensiveness, she shuts down. Not because she doesn't care, but because she can't connect to a version of him that isn't grounded. Emotional instability makes her feel unsafe, unheard, or responsible for his feelings, and that responsibility becomes exhausting. Distance isn't created by one bad conversation. It's created by repeated moments where she feels unheard, dismissed, or overwhelmed. It's created when he talks at her instead of with her. It's created when he interrupts, reacts too quickly, or refuses to understand her point of view. It's created when he tries to win the conversation instead of trying to understand the heart behind her words. Slowly, she starts pulling back, not because she's done, but because she's tired of trying to communicate with someone who isn't really listening. Poor communication often comes from a man losing his internal alignment. He stops speaking from clarity and starts speaking from emotion. He uses communication to discharge his anxiety instead of creating understanding. He either shuts down or overshares. He either becomes too quiet or too loud. He either avoids the hard conversations or turns every small issue into a dramatic debate. This inconsistency drains the relationship. It drains the trust. It drains the emotional connection that once felt natural. When communication becomes inconsistent, she begins to protect herself emotionally. She stops expressing her deeper thoughts. She stops sharing vulnerable details. She stops initiating conversations. She isn't being cold. She's being careful. She's pulling away because she doesn't feel safe to open up. All distance begins as emotional distance before it becomes physical distance. A woman withdrawing isn't rejection. It's a response to emotional exhaustion. It's her stepping back because the conversations that should bring closeness are now sources of stress. Men often misinterpret this shift. They think she's overreacting. They think she's becoming distant for no reason. They think she's changing, but she's not changing. She's protecting her peace. When a man's communication becomes unpredictable or emotionally heavy, she starts choosing silence over conflict, space over pressure. Her withdrawal is the result, not the cause. She's reacting to his approach, not abandoning the relationship. To reverse this, a man must learn to communicate with discipline, not emotional dumping, not reactive arguments, not passive-aggressive silence. True communication requires emotional control. It requires listening without interrupting. It requires speaking without attacking. It requires patience, clarity, and maturity. A man must learn to pause before responding. He must learn to speak from his values, not his wounds. He must learn the difference between expressing emotions and projecting them. Healthy communication doesn't mean being emotionless. It means expressing emotion in a grounded way. It means saying, "This is how I feel," without blaming her for it. It means hearing her concerns without defending your ego. It means asking questions instead of assuming the worst. When a man communicates like this, she stops feeling overwhelmed and starts feeling understood. She stops pulling away and starts leaning in. A grounded man brings calm energy into the conversation. He doesn't talk to win. He talks to understand. He doesn't react to every emotional moment. He responds with clarity. He doesn't make her responsible for his emotions, he owns them, and when a man operates from this mindset, distance disappears, she feels safe again, she feels connected again, she feels drawn to him again, not because he said perfect words, but because he communicated with strength. Poor communication creates distance, but intentional, disciplined communication restores connection. When a man learns to speak with clarity and listen with presence, he becomes a partner she trusts, not one she avoids. And that shift alone can transform the relationship from fragile to solid, because communication is not just a skill, it's an expression of who you are. When you elevate your communication, you elevate your entire connection. When a woman asks for space, most men immediately panic. They think it's the end, a breakup in disguise, a sign she's done. But that reaction reveals more about the man than the situation. Space is not a punishment, it's a signal. A sign that something in the dynamic has shifted, usually because the connection has become emotionally heavy, reactive, or imbalanced. And instead of trying to force closeness, a wise man steps back and reads the signal for what it truly is, an opportunity to reset the energy. Space becomes necessary when a woman feels overwhelmed, unheard, or pressured. When she feels like the emotional load is too much, or the communication has become suffocating, or his insecurity is leaking into the relationship. She doesn't pull away because she wants to run. She pulls away because she needs clarity. She needs to breathe. She needs to reconnect with herself. She needs to feel that her identity still exists outside the relationship. And when a man respects that, instead of reacting with fear, she feels safe again. The moment a man treats her request for space like a threat, he confirms exactly why she needed it. When he panics, chases, argues, or demands answers, she withdraws even further. Not because she doesn't care, but because now she feels responsible for his emotional state. That responsibility becomes a burden, not a bond. The more he tries to hold on tightly, the more she needs to loosen her grip. It is not rejection, it is self-preservation. The only men who fear space are the ones who are disconnected from themselves. They equate distance with loss because they've stopped standing on their own foundation. But a man who is grounded sees space differently. He understands that relationships grow through expansion and contraction. Sometimes they move closer, sometimes they stretch apart. Space allows breath, and breath allows perspective. Instead of trying to fill the silence, he holds stillness with strength. When she asks for space, she's trying to recalibrate the emotional energy between you. She's stepping back not to escape, but to reset. She's not running away from connection, she's stepping away from the pressure. A woman wants closeness, but not at the cost of her emotional stability. If the communication has become inconsistent, reactive, or unbalanced, she naturally seeks space to regain her center. But here's the important truth: how a man responds to space determines what happens next. A man who reacts with desperation loses her respect. A man who tries to force clarity pushes her further. A man who trips her, drains her emotionally. But a man who calmly honors her request communicates strength without saying a word. He shows her he's not afraid of emotional distance. He shows her he doesn't depend on constant reassurance. He shows her he can hold his own ground. This response creates something powerful: safety. When he gives her the space she needs, she starts to relax, her guard softens, her clarity returns, and once she feels the pressure lift, she naturally begins to re-engage. She comes back with more intention, more openness, and more desire to connect. Not because he convinced her, but because he didn't try to force her. Space gives her room to miss him, room to appreciate him, room to evaluate what she truly feels without the fog of emotional overload. Men underestimate how much emotional space affects attraction. A woman is not drawn to a man who collapses without her. She's drawn to a man who remains steady with or without closeness. Space allows her to test the strength of the bond, not through words, but through energy. She watches how he carries himself. She watches how he handles uncertainty. She watches if he respects her boundaries or tries to violate them. And that tells her everything she needs to know about the future of the relationship. Most men sabotage this moment by trying to fix things immediately. They panic, overtalk, over-explain, or push for closure. But space is not asking for solutions. It's asking for silence. It's asking for time. It's asking for emotional regulation. When a man honors that, he shows maturity, he shows confidence, he shows discipline. And that alone rebuilds attraction more than any speech ever could. When a woman asks for space, a man should not disappear in anger or punish her with silence. He should simply return to himself, his purpose, his routine, his growth. He should ground himself emotionally. He should stay steady, not distant, available, not needy, open, not desperate. This balance is what makes her feel safe to return, because the truth is simple. Space does not destroy relationships, fear does. Pressure does, insecurity does, but space, when handled with strength, heals, it resets emotional energy, it creates clarity, it allows two people to reconnect without noise. A man who understands this never fears space. He respects it, he reads it, he grows through it, and when she feels that strength, she doesn't drift away. She returns with a deeper trust than before. Rebuilding a relationship after things have slipped isn't about grand speeches, dramatic promises, or emotional intensity. It's about leadership and consistency, two qualities that reveal a man's true character. When the connection weakens, when attraction fades, when communication breaks down, many men try to fix everything overnight. They want immediate reassurance, instant closeness, instant results. But rebuilding doesn't respond to urgency, it responds to stability. It responds to the presence of a man who shows through action that he is grounded, intentional, and capable of leading the relationship back into alignment. Leadership in a relationship isn't about controlling her, it's about controlling yourself. It's about setting the emotional tone, not by force, but by example. When things fall apart, a weak man reacts. He panics, becomes emotional, begs for clarity, or dumps his fear onto her, but a strong man steps back into his frame. He acknowledges what went wrong, but he doesn't become defined by it. He has the awareness to see the problem clearly and the discipline to move differently going forward. Leadership is not loud, it's steady. It's seen in the way he carries himself, the way he speaks, the way he responds instead of reacts. A man who wants to rebuild must first rebuild himself. He must return to the habits, routines, and mindset that make him strong. He must reconnect with his mission, his standards, and his identity. A woman doesn't follow a man who is lost. She follows a man who knows where he's going, not because he's perfect, but because he's committed. Leadership is rooted in clarity. A man who knows himself brings stability to the relationship. A man who doubts himself brings chaos. Consistency is the proof of leadership. Anyone can act strong for a day. Anyone can show effort for a week, but consistency is what rebuilds trust. It's what shows her that your changes are not temporary reactions but long-term decisions. When a man is consistent, she feels safe. She sees that his actions match his words. She sees that he's reliable, grounded, and emotionally stable. Consistency rebuilds the connection one moment at a time, without pressure, without rushing, without forcing the relationship to move before it's ready. Rebuilding through leadership means communicating with calm confidence. It means no longer over-explaining, defending, or trying to convince her of your worth. It means expressing yourself clearly and listening without interruption. It means speaking from strength rather than insecurity. When a man communicates with this level of maturity, she naturally becomes more open. She can feel the difference between a man who is desperate for closeness and a man who is ready to lead. Leadership also means emotional regulation. Instead of reacting to her moods, her hesitations, or her requests for space, you stay grounded. Instead of chasing validation, you hold your center. Instead of spiraling into insecurity, you respond with clarity. When she sees that you're not shaken by uncertainty, she feels safe to engage again. Emotional steadiness is one of the most powerful ways a man communicates leadership without ever raising his voice. Rebuilding through consistency means showing up, not just for her, but for yourself. It means keeping the promises you make to yourself first. Your fitness, your work ethic, your discipline, your habits. These things shape your energy. And energy shapes connection. A man who is consistent in his life becomes consistent in his relationship. The more stable you are internally, the more stability you bring externally. And here's what most men overlook. Leadership isn't about being ahead of her. It's about guiding the emotional energy between you. It's about creating a dynamic where she feels inspired, not pressured. Where she feels supported, not suffocated. Where she feels heard, not overwhelmed. When you lead with emotional intelligence, everything softens, her guard lowers, her warmth returns. Her effort increases, not because you demanded it, but because your consistency created the space for it to return naturally. Leadership also means patience. Rebuilding takes time. Attraction doesn't revive overnight. Trust doesn't rebuild instantly. A man with a legacy mindset understands that time is part of the process. He doesn't rush. He doesn't threaten to leave if things don't improve quickly. He doesn't get frustrated because she's not responding at his pace. He stays steady. He lets his actions speak louder than his emotions. Patience shows emotional maturity, and emotional maturity rebuilds respect. Consistency means no disappearing when things get hard. No sudden mood swings, no unpredictable behavior. You show up with the same energy. Calm, present, intentional. You create emotional safety through reliability. She doesn't have to guess who you'll be today because your consistency shows her. And that reliability is what makes her open back up. Rebuilding through leadership and consistency ultimately transforms the relationship because it transforms the man leading it. When you become a stronger, clearer, more grounded version of yourself, the relationship naturally follows. She feels the shift not through your words, but through the stability of your actions, and that stability becomes the foundation for a deeper, stronger connection than before. Because in the end, rebuilding isn't about getting her back, it's about becoming the man she wants to come back to. Gentlemen, legacy isn't just about what you achieve in your career or what you build in your life, it's about who you become when no one's watching. It's about how you love, how you communicate, how you lead. If you want deep, lasting connection, you don't fix things by losing yourself. You fix things by becoming better, more disciplined, more composed, more you. When you reclaim your strength, when you court with consistency, and when you communicate with maturity, you don't just keep her, you inspire her. Stay the man she respects. Be the legacy she rests in. Build something unshakable. That's the mindset. That's how a legacy man wins and keeps winning.